What will you consider a win with this budget?
Well, I think at this point what we would consider a win is what the system is hoping for, and that is to stay level to where they are. We would like to see us get more than we got last time, but we would hope that it would be level. It's somewhat in our favor that that would be the case, because as part of the deal of getting the stimulus money, the Commonwealth pledged that it would maintain the funding level that it was at. We're a little bit nervous because we're starting to hear some rumblings that perhaps from the governor's office that they may ask for a waiver from the federal government about getting out of that. We certainly hope that that's not the case, so that we can deliver what we promised our students when they came to our universities.
In the last 30 seconds, it seems in some quarters as if universities now, in some instances, are looking upon themselves, or at least the state system, are looking upon themselves as profit-making institutions. Are they losing sight of the fact that they are nonprofit institutions and that they're there to prepare the students for the rest of their lives and for their careers and to perpetuate civilization and not to be an ongoing business per se?
The short answer is yes, and that's what we're worried about.
All right. Thank you very much for being with us today, Ken, and we'll be back with the next segment right after this.
Behind the Headlines is brought to you as a public service by PAConstructionJobs.com, where you can look for job openings, post a resume, or learn more about a rewarding career in Pennsylvania's highway construction industry. And by the Pennsylvania Business Council, envisioning a commonwealth in which residents enjoy a very high quality of life in sustainable communities. The Council works aggressively to define key long-term policy strategies and solutions that make the Commonwealth more competitive, creating and sustaining a better Pennsylvania. Additional underwriting provided by the Worrell Corporation Foundation, based in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. By Weber Incorporated, a leading manufacturer of hardwood lumber and wood products. The Highway Equipment and Supply Company, Central and Northeast Pennsylvania's authorized distributor for premier construction equipment manufacturers. And the American Home Bank, a nationally chartered and FDIC insured yet locally owned and operated bank in central Pennsylvania. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business. Behind the Headlines is also supported as a public service by Daily Express, transporting construction, farm, and industrial equipment throughout the United States.
Hi, welcome back to the second segment of Behind the Headlines. I'm Charlie Greenewald, and we're going to have a new installment of the Arnold Report on this particular segment. And to do that, we're lucky enough to have the chairman of Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy, Ed Arnold, join us. Ed, welcome to the show.
Good to see you, Charlie.
Well, it's good to see you again. As you know, we invite listeners and viewers to send in questions for you about current economic issues, and the three issues that have come up for this particular installment of the Arnold Report are, are you ready?
Yes, sure.
Okay, number one, these seem to be all very timely. The first question we have is, how can our economy ever recover if all of our manufacturing jobs are being sent to China and India?
Unfortunately, the very negative answer is it cannot. No nation has ever had a permanent dislocation of capital, and if we do not manufacture or create anything, we do not create wealth and value. Basically, our government, we have a thing that the wealth and prosperity can be created by the government. It must be created by private jobs, which we are not doing, especially in the small business, and again, especially in manufacturing.
Mm-hmm. The second question that we have for you is, would you please explain what a VAT tax is and what would it mean for the average person?
The average person, average is a very dangerous word, but it's value-added tax. Basically, oversimplification, it is a national sales tax, except it's taxed at each process along the way as opposed to just at the end user.
Value-added tax.
That in Australia they call the GST the General Service Tax. So it's, I assume, in different parts of the world. It appears to be a very efficient tax. We have the most probably inefficient tax system in the world because we have so many different taxes at so many different levels. If the value-added tax replaced substantial taxes that we presently have, rather than adding on top of, it would be good for everyone. Example is in Australia, they have a 10% value-added tax on everything, including services, as Rendell does recommend, and I agree with him. But they have no property tax. They have no sales tax. So therefore, if you would eliminate in all states our sales tax, if you would eliminate our property tax, and you would have a value-added tax, I would think you would find that, number one, in the world it appears, because most European countries and other countries in the world, most Western countries, use a value-added tax. It's a very efficient tax in that, number one, it's relatively inexpensive to collect, and the amount of cheating is relatively low.
And this is something that the National Administration has been looking for, or looking at, as an additional source of revenue. I guess there's some people who think, well, this would be okay if another tax would be phased out. But what we think might very well happen is that it would be put on top of.
Well, that's the problem. You used the famous word there, additional.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we have to eliminate. Now, what would be very difficult to do, what I just said, is most of these other taxes are state taxes. And we have this thing about states' rights. Unfortunately, in this case, a value-added tax would have to be a national tax. And basically, if we were to use it to replace state taxes, which could easily be done, by the way, also, you would be taxing the internet, which is somehow a sacred cow. Why the internet, which does nothing for local economies, is considered to be exempt from all sales taxes, I don't understand. But anyway, so the value-added tax, if it were a replacement tax as opposed to an additional tax, would probably be good.
Okay. The third and final question is, how much debt is it safe for America's national government to assume? Not talking about states, but how much debt is it safe for our national government to assume?
That is a very difficult thing, but unfortunately, you are not asking the right question. How much liabilities can our government take on? Our actual, what we record as the national debt, is less than probably 20% of our total government liabilities, because of all our contingent liabilities, a la pensions, health care, and so on. Right now, the overwhelming largest liability we have in our country is promised unlimited health care for the elderly, or for the basically welfare recipients, but both case either Medicare or Medicaid. And now we have Obamacare on top of it. It's a terribly inefficient system and extremely expensive. So basically right now, the answer is we at the present level are at an unsustainable level and we'll break ourselves. The question is when.
Mm-hmm. I hope that some of our congressmen are watching your report today to take this information back to Washington with them. Well, thank you very much. And we again ask all of our viewers, if you have questions for Mr. Arnold that you would like to examine further, to have him discuss on air, please email them to us at the email address that's on the screen. If you would do that, we will go through them and we'll get back to you on one of the future shows. We'll be posing those questions to Mr. Arnold. Okay, Ed, let's go on to gee, there's so many different issues.
Well, why don't we start with oil, because that will just go real quickly. Okay,
very good. Well, we find that, of course, that there is a serious problem in the Gulf of Mexico. Of course, the British Petroleum, BP, had an explosion on one of their oil rigs, and we find that, of course, as everyone knows, the oil has been pouring into the Gulf. Approximately at this point, when we're taping, there's about 40 million gallons of oil floating through the Gulf of Mexico, and BP is spending $24 million a day to clean it up. 25% of the Gulf of Mexico is closed for fishing right now. What's gone wrong there, and how can it be righted?
Unfortunately, we're talking too much about the symptoms rather than really the cause of the problem. Very frankly, the cause of this problem is our government. We have an extremely arbitrary system of exploration, primarily controlled by our states. We shouldn't have been drilling in 5,000 foot of water. We should have been drilling in 500 foot of water. It is far safer, far less expensive, and if there were a problem to happen, we could easily address it because it's in shallow water. But we have made all shallow water drilling in America off bounds.